Gentlemen, I'm so glad that you are not leaving. And I hope some of those folks who make just a little break to grab a fresh cup of coffee might come back, because we are discussing indeed, at least I think, a very crucial question. Is it a necessity, not a choice, the future of the NATO-EU relationship? Before I welcome my distinguished guests, who actually might come to stage right now, I'll pass a question to the audience first.
Okay, fine.
I'm very interested in your take. What do you think? What will survive longer?
Thanks.
NATO or the European Union? Your take. What will survive longer? NATO or the European Union? Who goes first? Three quick. Sir, here's a brave one in the back.
Martin Michelot from France, but based in Prague. I'm going to say the European Union.
Why?
Because the French-German engine is extremely strong, and I feel that there is a sense here that this will last for a long time.
Okay.
And at least if we have military structures that are even outside of the framework, this will continue the engagement, this will continue defense integration towards the European Union. So I'm a bit more positive, but it's just because you're forcing us to be.
Okay, so who goes with him? Hands up. Okay, Constanze, your take. Did you raise your hand, or was it just like some exercise? It was some exercise. So who else wants to chip in? There's a monsieur over there. He needs a microphone. Oh, there's a microphone coming from the left.
Thank you. Well, with due all respect to a colleague who mentioned that EU will survive, well, we see that unions, as in, in 20th century and 19th century, the life expectancy is average 50 years. And it's not that I'm very skeptical of the EU, but we see that NATO next year is 70 years. So they passed already the 50-year critical momentum. And it's a military alliance, whereas there is a concrete plans and strategies, whereas European Union, it's socio-economic and it's much more vibrant. Whereas if it's a military that is more on defense, where it's a clear aim and target, it's much more to keep together on the one path. So therefore I go for NATO.
Thank you very much. Are you major in math? No. Anybody else? One more voice from the audience. Are there also any women wanting to talk about this question? Over there. Okay, cool. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I'm just wondering why we are obsessed with the idea that either the EU or NATO or both are going to disappear. I mean, we don't have many examples in history of actual disappearance of organizations. They actually tend to outlive their initial goals. And even the League of Nations transformed into the United Nations. It disappeared, but it actually turned into something else. Yeah. So I don't think we are aiming anywhere towards the disappearance of either organization.
Who goes with her? Judy Dempsey, she's the editor-in-chief of the Strategic Europe and, well, senior fellow, whatever. Yes. You really agreed with this young lady. Why?
You're absolutely right. Organizations just never get out of the way. They never disappear.
Is that good?
I think it depends on the organization, firstly.
So coming back to the European Union and NATO, let's get serious now.
Okay. It's very complicated, because if you argue that the EU will outlive NATO, then you have to argue that the EU will develop a serious, coherent defence, foreign and security policy, and that's absent at the moment, firstly. Secondly, if you argue that NATO is to disappear or go out of business, then you're arguing on the basis that the whole idea of the European continent will have changed fundamentally as for the raison d'etre of NATO. And the raison d'etre of NATO is rather questionable at the moment. I was thinking of this yesterday. If there was no Russia threat, and if the Middle East was stable, would we need NATO?
Would we need NATO? I welcome Chris Lombardi, Vice President of the European Business Development. Would we need NATO if we wouldn't have the threat from the outside?
I think you always need military alliances in general. No, it's okay. I think you do need military alliances and regional alliances, depending. I think you're always going to have a threat, Judy. I mean, no matter what you look at, there are threats out there. So in one way or another, there will be something. And as you said, it might transform into something else. But I think there's always some sort of alliance that will have to happen regionally. At least that's the history of what we've seen in the world. So.
Coalitions are doing.
I really like the remarks from the north, from the woman from Ireland, that we mustn't only talk about like military inventions, that NATO, and we talked a lot about that during the last 1.5 days, NATO should be much more. It should be also a force of shared values, but also helping really to prevent conflicts when it comes to the problems with the so-called refugee crisis. Maybe NATO could do more than it's doing right now. So this is an aspect, maybe Mr. Ambassador Alejandro Alvargonzález, the Assistant Secretary General for Police Military Affairs of NATO. Which role could NATO play, should NATO play to be more?
NATO is a political organization with a military arm, with a military box and toolbox. So it is not only military, but today we also think very much on prevention. And in fact, many of the policies that NATO is developing, projecting stability, just to give an example that we do with several partners, tries to prevent. This is one of the basics. And most of our energies go in that direction, especially nowadays where there are different kinds of conflicts. Nowadays, when you mix, when you making the difference between peace, conflict and crisis is also so difficult. You have to try to manage in all these areas, and you do it with different tools and different means, of course, and different policies. Again, I have to underline, we are a political alliance. And I say alliance because you were talking a while ago about what would happen if EU disappeared or NATO. NATO has been able to adapt. From 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall, to now, you saw an alliance that developed more towards an international organization because the concept of alliance was not so much needed, because there was not such I would say, a vital menace. Now it is developing again towards the concept of alliance, and both concepts are different. I mean, you have the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but you also have the Atlantic Alliance. And we have to be careful, because even though they're going all together, they have different consequences. And we have to play on both those grounds and on both those different political crises, political problems, menaces, etc.
Thank you. I keep you in mind. We've been talking a lot about the problems and the possibilities of NATO. The topic of this round is a necessity, not a choice, the future of the NATO-EU relationship. I think it is important to talk about the European Union at this point. Yeah. You have been the Poland's Deputy Prime Minister.
You have European Commissioner.
Exactly right. I welcome Elżbieta Bieńkowska, Commissioner for Single Market Industry. Yeah, you have been, you're Polish. You have been Poland's Deputy Prime Minister. When we talk about Europe, we have to talk about countries like the country you come from. Yeah. How would you explain?
May I?
You can go in the middle.
No, I don't go in the middle.
How is the European Union doing right now?
Pretty well, you know. I just wanted to start from this personal note. I don't know how many of you in this room, being my age also, because I was mid-20s, in my mid-20s when the revolution came. So I remember, you know, what were our feelings and my generation feelings toward NATO in EU. And of course, if you ask me what will finish or what will last longer, EU or NATO, I will respond exactly as you responded. Why they should really conclude, why it should not last much long. And you know, I'm dealing now with the European defense industry mostly. But of course, the cooperation, because the topic, the title of this panel is necessity, not a choice. Not a choice. Yes, it is necessity. It is necessity. We are allies. We are sharing the same values.
Do we?
And yes, we are sharing the same values, and we are facing the same threats for the last several or few years. We are sharing the same threats, external, internal. They are changing, they are evolving. So we in the European Commission, of course, responding to what we are asked for by the European member states, because it's not our role is to execute. We are doing our best on two things. First, of course, on our cooperation with NATO, and I have to tell you that during the last 2 years since the Warsaw Joint Declaration, it's moving forward in a really unprecedented speed. We have together 74 common actions. We are working at the very working level. I was personally a few times at the NAC meeting just to, because transparency is also the most important, just to report what we are doing internally within the European Union on strengthening our internal defense capacities. Because this is the other leg, the other pillar of my work. I'm really working very hard, and I like to be devoted, and I like to be really devoted to my work. So if I do not believe it, then it would not work. So I'm trying to really do my best to find, and we found this solution, to find the best solution within the European Union for member states to cooperate. We are starting with the industry. That's why me here. I'm not defense commissioner.
Thank you. Judy, do we share the same values in the European Union?
Commissioner...
You can stand up if you want to.
I don't want to stand up.
Okay, you
Thank
could.
you.
Okay.
They asked us to stand up to be a little more lively, you know.
I will limit it. Okay. Commissioner, this values issue, the EU put great store on values until quite recently. And we have seen how values, in terms of the migration crisis, refugees, and what's happening to the rule of law in Poland, and what's happening in Hungary, and the anti-corruption pushback now in Romania, the values are being questioned inside the European Union. This is the first thing. And secondly, NATO, if you read the founding documents, it does mention democratic values. Well, look what's happening in Turkey and what's happening among the member states. And I think realpolitik and national interest have taken precedence over values. Values are difficult to defend. And you need courage and you need consistency. And these aren't actually being pushed through at the moment. The Commission is trying with Poland, and it's very, very important. But what you need is consistency, and if you're going to talk about values, stick to them. And they hurt when you actually tell a member country that's affecting our worldview, they feel offended or they try to veto certain decisions. But the point about Europeans embracing values, it's one of the architects upon what Europe is built, but what it means for reformers outside Europe. There's a queue to join the EU because of what the EU represents. It's not the structural funds, of course this helps, but it's the values of the rule of law, of transparency, of human rights, of civil rights. And for the EU to be picky or choose to turn a blind eye to its own member states, it sends a very bad signal to our neighbours.
What does that mean? Is Donald Trump right when he kind of says, let's focus more on business than on values?
Businesses have values too, you know, and they do. We have people...
That gets some applause, I think. Here's some people.
We have people that we employ, and respect and trust and collaboration are some of those. The ambassador spoke about changes within NATO over the last several years. The Commissioner spoke about the number of changes we've seen just in the last few years within the EU on defense and security. And both NATO and the EU share a lot of those values, as well as a number of those same members. And so I think the critical question for us should be whether or not we're going to grow and change together or do it sort of in isolation. And I think that would be really bad, because I think that trust and that collaboration would be absolutely broken.
But isn't the European Union drifting apart? I mean... No diplomatic answer. No, but really seriously, if you look at countries like Poland, Hungary, you know, all the internal problems we see when it comes to freedom of press.
What I see is a world that has evolved from I would say, direct military menaces, which do exist and are there, to another one in which we see hybrid menaces that have to do very much with eroding our values. Values and principles, I have to put it very clearly, are the basis of the functioning not only of the Western world but of the organizations that are basic for us. And this is the European Union and this is NATO. And this is why 22 members of the European Union are in NATO. This is what we defend. In the late times, we used to talk of territorial integrity or defending of sovereignty, but in the end, if you take all this and you decompose it, what you're talking about, especially today, is defending the basic idea of freedom. There is a menace to freedom, as it has always happened. In 1989, we saw, again I have to go back, the Berlin Wall fall, and the guy called Fukuyama said that this represented the end of history. Because democracy had won. It was triumphant all over the place. It would expand in a natural way. Nobody said that if it was expanding, it was as a consequence of the victory of I would say, the main political culture. Now, today we are seeing this maybe going backwards. The risk exists. The possibility that the end of history was not real is there. And we today are competing. We see two systems, one autocratic, I would say, I can say it like this, autocratic, corrupted and aggressive. And funny enough, it attracts people, it attracts regions, it attracts some nations. And another model, which is the model we have defended, be it in the European Union, be it in NATO, which is, or tries to be at least, that has this ideal of being more open, more transparent, more free, more democratic, more human rights based. This is what has to be the engine of everything we are doing nowadays. And this is the main base for NATO in its policies and in its future. This is what we are looking at.
Ines, can I go back to you on this?
Do you want to answer
to that? I only wanted to say that I fully agree, that I share these views, that that really values are something that we need to defend. The values are the basis of our unity in the European Union, but also in NATO. And of course, I'm not naive. I know in what world we are living. But really, the values are much more important, or more important for me than even economy or money or anything. Values, something.
And what does this concrete mean? I mean, which options do we have, concrete options, to deepen the relationship between the European Union and the NATO at this very moment?
I think that we did the right step 2 years ago, with the, as I said, with the joint declaration. And this cooperation is moving very well. We are cooperating very actively on cybersecurity, on hybrid threats. As I said, this is a cooperation that have never happened before the Warsaw Declaration. So I think we just need to just go on with this approach that was taken 2 years ago, because it's going quite well. And what I was afraid, as we started with the internal EU, within the EU, defense cooperation, from the very beginning, I was trying to be, I use this word, transparent, because I think that complementarity is the word that is key here. So to be transparent toward our NATO partners, especially those that are not EU members, because 22 NATO members are EU members, so 22 EU members are NATO members. So I was trying to be transparent and really, because this is I'm quoting myself, but I repeat it on and on. The stronger EU in defense is stronger NATO at the same time. There is no contradiction between those two.
Thank you very much. I would like to open it now to you, ladies and gentlemen. Do you have any questions, any remarks, any ideas how to strengthen the relationship between NATO and EU? Please, a microphone here.
I think you made a brilliant point about the overall values being undermined when we have members who perhaps don't achieve the level that we expect of them. But the challenge is, once they're already members, what options, what consequences, what can we do to ensure that we preserve the values of the Union, both the EU and NATO, particularly in NATO, where we have no opportunity for a member to unexceed. Please.
Let's make it precise. What about Turkey?
It's a very great question. Actually, you know what? They should reapply.
No?
Who decides?
well, if it goes to be the council, well, then we'd have to change elements of the treaties. But actually, make it public, treaty change, it would be very difficult. But there should be the possibility, when in the future, when members join, you have to reapply if the rules are broken. Sanctions first, or else reapplication.
Do you agree?
And for the EU too. Well, no, the EU is a bit more complicated.
It's even more complicated.
Yes, and the EU, well,
but is it realistic, Judith? Is it really realistic?
I
mean, we want to be realistic. We are living in a bubble anyhow. We kind of know that.
Well, we shouldn't be living in a bubble for this. And the Commission is trying to have a dialogue with your country.
But definitely, the European Union was not prepared for the situation as it is now. I will not speak for NATO, but definitely all of the institutions, European institutions, so Commission, Parliament, the Council, we are trying to adapt to this new situation because we are not prepared for such a situation that we have in some member states. Let's not name them.
So some changes really have to be made.
Yes.
Okay, we keep that. Yeah. One conclusion, sir.
Yes, I was Carnegie from Latvia. Yesterday we talked about holding barbecues to inform people here about what's NATO. I think we need something even more than barbecues to inform people what the EU is all about within our countries in Europe, and it's even worse problem in the United States. Where there it's not just indifference or the two senators who are talking today. In some cases there's open hostility to the EU. And if we talk about EU-NATO cooperation, 79 points, those of us who are in policy making, we understand that. But if there's indifference or hostility within the US toward the EU, how are we going to keep EU and NATO cooperating together?
I think that's a very, very important point, but also vice versa. And I have to say the press conference of President Trump today doesn't help, you know, looking from the European Union towards the United States of America. A very good point. I would like to get in more voices. Yes, please. The woman from Ireland and then the gentleman over there.
A couple of things. First of all, the European Union is the greatest peace project in modern history, but nobody talks about it anymore, and it's terrible. That
so we do, and you get an applause.
Yes, yes.
The European Union is the greatest peace project in modern history.
Here's another one, and you can come into this, is the media. Because apparently Jimmy Carter said exactly the same as Trump said today, but the difference was the way he said it and our reaction to it and the media's reaction. So I think the media would love to talk down the European Union about to its demise, but it's absolutely not. The European Union is strong and could be stronger if the media started telling the truth about it. Thank you.
Okay. I think you all agree.
No, yes, because it's true. In some member states, you know, people link EU with the structural funds. In some parts, it's a single market. In some parts, with the other things. But really, not. This is not really clear and exactly known that this is a peace project, and the values are the basis for this. This is definitely the situation right now.
Mr. Ambassador.
Yes, I want to say very clearly: if there is a peace project that has tried to keep peace along 70 years, it's NATO. But funny enough, you say NATO, you say military, and people say, oh no, it's war, what they're thinking. It's not, it's just the country, and the general was explaining that a while ago. I mean, you're talking sometimes out of reality. In an ideal world, NATO would not exist. In an ideal world, there would not be military or policemen or judges. But this is not an ideal world, I'm afraid. So we have to keep that working. And NATO has been fundamental to keep our freedom. Do you really think, after what we saw in the 60s and the 70s and the 50s and the 40s, that today we would be here, like this, talking freely, if NATO did not exist? Do you really think so? That if the transatlantic bond did not exist, we would be here today speaking in freedom? Come on, it's a joke.
I would just say from the American perspective, it's unfortunate. I mean, everybody in this room knows that the European Union is a peace project. I'd even go farther from my seat and say it's a security project. I mean, we knew tying together the European coal and steel community was to make sure there was no more war. But most Americans don't know that. They think they only see what they see now, unfortunately, and that is the EU is somehow set up to be a trade bloc against us when we actually helped try to set it up and underpin it. So it's on us too to help educate Americans to not think it's a threat somehow, but actually we can cooperate with it along with NATO.
Judy.
Can I jump in here? I sympathise with the Northern Ireland issue because the peace process would not have happened without the EU. I mean, it all came together, which is very important. But what I wanted to say was, and I noticed this in Germany, this is a bubble. This tent is a bubble. NATO is a bubble. The EU is a bubble. And the EU offices are generally bubbles. What is needed is not speaking to like-minded people. It's a complete waste of time. It's mobilizing.
Okay, let's go.
No, wait a second. No, wait, it's mobilizing. It's mobilizing like-minded people to do town hall meetings, to go to schools, to go to high schools, to go out to companies, to go out to universities, to go out to shops. It's to break down the bubble and break down the language. There are some young people I know, they don't understand this gobbledygook of the EU or NATO. And there's no point in patting ourselves on the back. You have to go out and sell the project.
Okay, cool. We have been we have been bubbling on this issue over the last 2 days. So I mean, we really should make a plan of action. I mean, one idea really was this barbecue idea, you know, and
who are you going to invite?
Someone, not you, because you're not, you know. But I think it's a good idea. And someone said yesterday, I forgot whom, NATO starts at home. Oh, that was the Canadian Prime Minister, I think.
Sorry, can I add something?
But it's true, NATO starts at home, but how do we do that, Mr. Ambassador?
No, I just wanted to add something in this very same line. We were talking values just a minute ago. NATO or the EU are not a menace to anyone because of its military strength. It is a menace because not as a consequence of what we do, but what we represent, what we are. We are a bad example for others because we are free, there is prosperity, and this is taken care of. This is real. When you talk of the attraction of the light of Brussels in the 80s and 90s, when we are accused by Russia that we expanded to the east, I always say the same. It was the east that expanded to the west because they knew that here, in this city, the organizations that represented prosperity, democracy and freedom were here.
Let's open up this bubble. Is the colleague from the Red Star still here? No, he has left.
There's a gentleman back there.
That's unfortunate. Yeah, so this senor over there, and then I go to that direction.
All right.
Monsieur.
Yes, my name is İlter Turan. I'm from Istanbul Bilgi University, and I wonder if there is not a contradiction in this idea of cooperation between NATO and the European Union. And the contradiction is this. If NATO does its job, then there's no reason for the European Union to do the same thing. No. And conversely, if the European Union does such a good job, then we don't need the European NATO. Or at least, I mean, it was challenged, make a challenge to NATO. And let me point out that not all European countries that are members of NATO are necessarily members of the European Union. This is an added complication. So I'm tempted to say, let's think about reality rather than these dreams. Thank you.
I have the feeling there are some countries who would not like to be members of the European Union, but really are happy to be members of the NATO.
But this is entirely a possibility too. Yes.
To you, and then to you, and then I move over there.
I think that if you look out in the incredible long term, but again, you have the geography issue. But in the short term, or at least in the short, to medium term, you have significant different threats out there. And there is a conventional threat, and the hard threat, the collective security, which NATO has always been addressing. But now you have little green men and disinformation campaigns and cyber warfare at the same time. And the EU can lend a lot of experience and close proximity to that to help NATO as well. So I think you have two different missions right now, and if they do it cohesively and coherently, then it could work really well.
Okay, so leave the bubble and teach the Americans about the little green men's. Okay.
Not really, but as I said, we were discussing it also in the framework of NAC, and I have not heard from any ambassador some concerns about whether that there is a contradiction. As the way that we are presenting it, the way that we are trying to start this cooperation, because for 60 years there had not been any defense cooperation in Europe. The way we start to develop this is also very much linked to the efficiency of the spending money, and this will also add some money to the defense budget in Europe, I think, because the efficiency will be much bigger. We have a lot of duplications in Europe. Every each and every member state really spends the money sometimes for the same things but separately. So this is
that's
what
been going on for years and it should be stopped.
What?
Nothing.
You, and then you. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Ulrich Smith from Denmark, and I just want to say thank you, first of all, for hosting this amazing event and for having a third of the participants being youth, because I think we are actually already out there. We have volunteers starting to do that, education in high schools, in universities. I know projects in Romania that does in education on fake news. I know people trying to reach out on democratic values in Portugal. These things are happening, but for 30 years we have been taking not only transatlanticism, but also democracy for granted. And no one wanted really to invest in it. And now people are reinvesting. So we just need to ride that wave up. And I think this discussion here today shows that NATO and EU wants to do that partly together. Some things you can do together, some things you will have to do side by side in complementarity. So I just want to say, there are many people here today from young associations, and they're doing a part, but they need a little more push.
Precisely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very encouraging remark. I think it is important to also look on the bright side. I mean, as difficult as the situation is right now within the European Union, within Europe, within the NATO, regarding our relationship, but there is, I think it's also very true, there are many young people out in this world who really kind of fight for the same cause or try to teach about the same cause. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for your presentation. I think that, first I will say that I am Federico Yáñez. I am a retired general of the Spanish Air Force and a former assistant deputy director of the International Military Staff. I think that the issue here is that both organizations have a long history. We are going to celebrate the 70th anniversary of NATO next year. We have celebrated this year, I think it was the 65th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome. The development of both organizations has been different because in the European Union, the first thing was the pillar, the common the European community, the first economic matter, the pillar, then there was the legal, and now finally we got, after the Maastricht Treaty, the defense pillar. And then on NATO, as the ambassador mentioned before, is not a military organization that some people believe. It's a defensive organization, political one, with a very important military branch, command structure, that is very unique for any other organization.
So what's your question, sir?
Yes, the question is, not the question, the real thing is that the title of the panel that you prepare is very well done. It is a necessity, not a choice. We need to cooperate, we need to work together, but cooperation has to be deeper than what we have written yesterday in the joint declaration. Because when we come to forces, we have only a set of forces, and we need to plan on both sides, taking each other in consideration. If not, the CART, I mean the Coordinated Annual Review, is going to be a failure because there is another system that is the NATO Defense Planning System that is already there. So we need to have coordination and working together. But we are not enemies, we are not in front of each other, we can complement each other.
Thank you very much. So NATO is not a choice?
Thank you. I'm going to open the bubble a little bit more. Brandon from One, which is a development NGO that also works on fragility and conflict. And my question is, how can we better link what the EU is doing as the largest development actor in the world with what NATO is doing? And how can this better inform our strategies on asymmetric warfare and radicalization? And just to contextualize that more concretely, when you look at case studies for why young men were joining Boko Haram, for example, you see that a lot of them are not joining because they're unemployed or uneducated, as people commonly believe, but because Boko Haram can offer them financial services like small loans so they can build their own businesses. So in light of this, how can we use development and maybe with the MFF around the corner, possibly take some military financing and put this into development? I mean, this is a radical idea, but like, is this something by financing education and health, is this something that could potentially be perceived as a long-term military strategy?
Thank you, Judy.
I'll be very brief. Thank you. This is really important. From the perception point of view, the EU prides itself on doing soft power. In fact, it does soft power pretty badly. And NATO is supposed to be hard power. And the EU, in terms of what you do, intellectually the two could be complementary. If NATO does a hard power mission, you just can't leave it what the Americans did in Iraq. You've got to follow it up immediately with soft power, with development, with infrastructure, with hospitals, with sanitation, with water, with actually being able to build on victory. And this has never worked. This should be the collusion between NATO and it's possible. But the whole way the development aid structure is meted out in the EU, plus its perception of soft power, it needs a long way to go.
So many changes you ask for.
Yes.
Okay. Please.
I just wanted to make a small remark from what we started. I was told that organizations do not die. I can assure you that organizations that lose function, they die. We had an example of Western European Union, the so-called Sleeping Beauty, that passed away in 2011. So what I want to say that as long as NATO managed to adapt to the evolving challenges, and as long as EU manages to answer the needs of the people and not drown in bureaucracy, the organizations will continue to work successfully. And there is one thing that we all should keep in mind. Developing democracy is important. It is the guarantee of peace. Democracies do not fight each other. So this should be the main aim of both organizations, to spread the values as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Organizations can die, so there is really kind of no real way to lay back and think, we've existed for so long, nothing can ever happen to us. That's what you're saying. Lady in red.
Thank you. Organizations do die. Let's remember the Warsaw Pact. It died. And that's how NATO evolved more. That's why NATO was created in the first place. And NATO is nothing more than the cooperation of Europe and the United States. Canada. Now, the fact that NATO is involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, I don't know whether the EU would be willing to be involved in Iraq and Afghanistan by itself. On the other hand, another question. Yesterday and today, we had this big problem with President Trump, the US discussing, okay, we're not taking everything for granted, but discussing of funding and how the US would not invest in NATO, which left the EU countries to invest in NATO, in defense, which means we have the Euro defense in NATO. On the other hand, may I say, because I might sound peculiar from what I'm saying, I'm not in political sciences, I'm not in international relations, I'm a citizen, I'm a medical doctor, which means my views are such of a citizen, not of a professional in the field. So the people, and I am from Greece, I forgot to say that, it's an important part. The Greeks at this point are despaired by the immigrant crisis. We have over 1 million immigrants, we don't know what to do with them as a country, and they're desperate, they don't know what to do with themselves. We're asking the EU, we're asking NATO, yes, they're trying to support Greece in securing the borders. We have Frontex. How effective are they? On the other hand, we have another NATO country, an ally, Turkey, who is not keeping the immigrants as the agreement is between the EU and NATO. So all these problems that are today, that we have, I believe we have a crisis of leadership, we have a crisis of values. It's very nice to say we support the same values. Yes, we grew up with some values. Today, I think these values are to be discussed whether they exist or not. And our democracy.
A question? Do you want to address a question or just deliver your statement?
I think I'll just make a statement, and I would like the comments on this statement. Whether
one more statement, then we want to get the other people involved.
That's true. Okay, fair enough.
Okay. So one more statement. What do you want to put into
at
this
point, where both NATO and the EU are sharing some common elements, defense in this sense, and the political forum with the US. And the people, the citizens, have a crisis in believing in either of them.
Okay, I get your point. I will pass this as a question to the panel, and then we go back to you. Do the European member states need to invest more in their own abilities to defend their states?
You mean own within EU?
Or within the European Union?
They decided, yes, I share this view, but I will maybe respond to also to this comment. Because, you know, as we ask the European citizens, and we have such data almost every month, what is the most important, what is at the top of the list, what they need European Union for, they say security. This is for now really on the top of the list, and this is also our response. This is our response to the challenges and to the threats that people see around. That we try to cooperate, but also show them, maybe not enough, definitely not enough, that we are really responding to the needs. I also hate bureaucracy. I hate, but I think that this what we are doing now is a very concrete, and this what we are doing together with NATO for the last years is very concrete. This is not bureaucracy, these are not papers, this is a real work, real actions, and real money behind this.
Any remarks from the panel?
Yes. Just, I wanted to underline with her. First, it's true, we have two different toolboxes. It's probably much broader that of the EU than that of NATO. NATO has an expertise which is military, but we complement each other very, very well. Someone was mentioning that if NATO did well, EU would not exist, and vice versa. We go again to the ideal world. We are not in the ideal world, and we need to complement each other. And we need to do it also in defense, because we need to see where the gaps are and where our policies can go better. You have those instruments in development, education, governance, etc. I remember, and sorry because I'm Catholic, and I remember a sentence from Pope Paul VI when he said, "Today the name of peace is development." Well, someone said he's communist. Now we would say he's got some common sense. Now, when you say today the name of development, the name of peace is development, then you have to say, if you want development, you need peace, therefore you need security too. And I go to something else that was said, and which is connected to all this. They take democracy for granted. Whoever takes democracy for granted will not be ready to defend it.
Yes, yes.
Strong words. Sir.
Germany, German Council on Foreign Relations. First, I want to congratulate you for the section, in my view, where the lowest number of people hang over their cell phones and pretend they're listening while the thing is going on. So this is a very interesting debate, and you attract the attention. Second, I raised my finger in the...
Maybe the batteries are empty.
Or it was more interesting around 12 today to look at the cell phone, I admit. Now, I raised my fingers in the values section, and I think it's important to remember that the values of the West, and I don't want to speak of EU and NATO, but use that word, are in danger not because of a competing ideology like in the Cold War, but because of new technologies that we have to somehow manage in their relevance for the values, for the liberty, for the dignity of the individual that are at the core of Western thinking. They are also in danger because other more authoritarian nations extend political influence, Russia, China, and this is not so much a case for a defense alliance as NATO, but it is a case to be on top of innovation, to be part of an innovation cycle in new technologies, to play a role in creating regulation, to insert ethics into these sorts of rules and norms that we need to develop for all that, to keep the Western spirit alive. And so one should measure the performance of the EU and NATO and the West as a whole against this demand that we actually try to be on top of the innovation and be technologically sophisticated and be able to add that sort of ethics into regular life. Otherwise, it's useless. Next to that, I would say, don't forget that over years, the EU's existence was made possible because NATO was there. That's no longer really true, but I think when we talk of the D in ESDP, there's not much to it, so we still need both organizations.
Thank you very much indeed.
Waiting for ages.
Yes, who is waiting for ages? And then you can pass on the microphone to this
there is
gentleman
another
with the beard, and then the next
for
one
ages
with
behind. Yes, there is another one.
Who is aging behind me? This young man, he can age a little longer. Is there another one? Lady, please.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Ania Tobur. We all seem to agree that NATO and EU are stronger together. And taking advantage of the fact that we have actually an industry representative on the one hand, and then the commissioner for EU industry on the other hand on the panel, I would be interested in understanding or your perspectives of what actually could be the role for the industry in strengthening the transatlantic security architecture.
Thank you.
I would like to pass this question to you.
Sure, thank you. And it would build on exactly what I think the General said and the gentleman from the German Council on Foreign Relations, which is the interoperability and complementarity that we've been talking about can't just be at the government level. It has to be government, it has to be military, it has to be industry to industry. And it has to actually be industry with government as well. And everybody has to be talking, whether it's at planning cycles or threat assessments in terms of defense and security, or on the innovation side, right, which is generally businesses know, or on the leading edge of innovation, they have to be talking to the governments. Otherwise, people will do things separately. And so I think it's really important that our businesses, and most of them have now complete transatlantic links. I don't think there is really such a thing as a purely American company or a purely European company. There are so many offices and people that now transit both sides that those links have to remain, the supply chains have to remain, and we have to inform the government and work together with them. So I think that's how we can possibly do it.
Yeah. And definitely the role of the industry is central there, because what we are doing in Europe for now is we have started with the industrial defense cooperation. This is industrial cooperation. So of course, the central role of the member states and the governments, but the central role of the industry. And also, one more example about those links. Global links of the defense industry. We created a program of this within EU defense development program. We created it as, again, I'm quoting, EU money for EU companies. And then we change it because it's impossible in this. Of course, the general idea is the same, but we have some criteria also for the third countries companies that would be able to participate in the fund.
But people, let's be honest. I mean, we're having a president who's kind of working against this idea of free markets. And he rather wants to make a deal between you and me and not between, like, Europe and then the United States.
And that ignores, I think, 20, 30, 40 years of globalization. So
yes, but now
I could point to this administration and say, every U.S. Army officer is actually protected by a Saab Carl Gustaf weapon system. That's a Swedish program. Yeah. Or the nation's capital in Washington. So the White House is actually protected by a system that was developed by Norway, by Kongsberg and Raytheon together.
And the Norwegians here.
So that I mean, I know that's not EU, but it's European. Yeah. And those are the things that I think are oversimplified sometimes at the political level. So we, as industry, need to, I don't say ignore it, but we listen to it careful, but we really work at the industrial level and with the armed forces and continue that relationship. Otherwise, we're going to all fall to this narrative that's not true. So we have to make sure that we keep those links going.
And also tell those stories,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Very important. This bearded man with the glasses.
The man with the glasses. Thank you so much. Can Pohl. I'm the defense analyst of the Istanbul-based think tank EDAM. Actually, I had to make a short intervention because I heard something about Turkey not keeping the refugees well, and that's a sensitive issue. I will not take much time, and I will, in the end, will ask a thought-provocative question. But actually, a NATO country, hosting 4 million refugees, and the only NATO country with no boots on the ground, that didn't adopt a no boots on the ground policy vis-à-vis ISIS, and cleared the western bastion of ISIS, Elbab, by conventional armed forces. Actually, I think do not deserve to hear such a thing. Like
that's a very valid point, and I should have corrected this misinformation. Thank you for that. Because it's that some people say this is one reason why you're still in NATO.
And as a military scientist, I like to say that we are not addressing the source of the problem. Since the 1982 Hama uprising, the Ba'ath regime of Syria now enjoys favorable demographics. And the Syrian generals, all of them sanctioned because of the war crimes, are openly threatening the refugees for not coming back to the country. Yeah. And if you were a refugee in Turkey coming from the Sunni neighborhoods of Hama, for instance, you wouldn't go to the area of responsibilities of those generals who are sanctioned like 5 times, 6 times by United States Treasury Department or the European Union, where they are like walking like openly. And one question to my distinguished European colleagues here. Most of the time Turkey is really criticized based on the democratic parameters, and I think you really have a voice in that, you really have a reason in that. But asking a thought-provocative question, do you really want the Turkish people to decide on the refugee deal democratically? Are you ready for that? Are you ready for the answer? For asking the Turkish people and Turkish people answering to the refugee deal very democratically, through a referendum, for instance?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I think that was a rhetoric question. Thank you for that one, sir.
Sinan Ülgen, also happen to be with Edam in Istanbul and Carnegie Europe. I just want to bring a crystal ball in the middle of the room, if I may, and ask the panelists their view about 10 years down the road, how the EU-NATO relationship has changed. Are we likely to see more of the same, namely, a bit more of what's being done now? Or are we likely to see a systemic change that can be the EU adopting, a more strengthened attitude towards security and defense? Or alternative, that can be NATO becoming more political, more oriented towards crisis management and so on. So what do you think in terms of how this relationship is likely to evolve?
Thank you very much. You keep this question in mind for the last round. I get another 3 questions, please. No more remarks.
Please,
sir.
I
know.
Aging, yes.
So, yes, the young man.
Good afternoon. This is Bruno Lette from GMF. I do appreciate the value debate, but I also would like to get back a little bit to the real world. Because what is the value of EU-NATO? It's peace and prosperity. And peace is prosperity, but prosperity can also sustain peace. That's why I think I would like to hear from the panel as well, what could be a more ambitious agenda between the EU and NATO, since this panel is about EU-NATO cooperation? What could be a more ambitious agenda between the EU and NATO to guarantee that prosperity as being a way to peace?
Thank you very much. 2 more questions. This lady and then the still young looking.
I think the young one has been waiting for quite some time.
You've had the microphone before.
I have already, so I'm happy to...
go for it.
Okay, just a very quick question. I would like to hear the panelists on... Sorry, Alice Panier from Johns Hopkins University in Washington, D.C. I would like to hear the panelists on whether Brexit is an opportunity or a challenge for EU-NATO cooperation.
Okay. 3 heavy questions, and I just got the good news that we have 10 more minutes, so you get a little bit more time to answer this question, please.
Since I missed the remarks, if I may just make a short remark. My name is Dénes András Nagy. I'm from Hungary. And consistently in Eurobarometer polls, Hungarian and Polish EU member state citizens have shown that they are among the top pro-EU populations within our union. And as a young Hungarian, European transatlanticist who's worked in our EU institutions and for our military alliance NATO, might I ask for more optimism? President Tusk, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, President Macron, they all agree in intensified defense cooperation. Neither of them question membership of our European Union or NATO. So if I may say, the bright new generation, many of whom I've met here, I see are full of optimism. And if I might just ask for a call to that. I'm fully confident in the survival of both of our organizations. Thank you.
Let's have a call for optimism. How do we do that? Shall we stand up and shake our hands? No, that's probably too corny.
No, I don't think
so. Sir, how does the relationship between NATO and the European Union look in 10 years' time?
Well, that's the question of the crystal ball. I have to say, my crystal ball ran out of batteries this month. So I can't go. What I am more in the side of is of trying to build, more than just predicting. I cannot predict, but we have to try to go further and further. There are challenges in the way, but a lot has been done in 2 years. A lot. I mean, EU-NATO cooperation nearly did not exist. It was just, occasional, let's put Berlin Plus, etc. In 2 years, we've found 74 lines of cooperation. To implement those lines like the one on military mobility, for instance, it will take years. And more important than that, it is already changing the culture of both organizations. We meet every day. Every day. Half my team is down the city every day, and they come here. We meet all the time. We exchange ideas. We exchange papers, documents. We go to the same places. I go to Bosnia-Herzegovina with someone from the European Union. We think of, well, what are you going to do in Iraq? Because I'd like to compliment you. We are doing that. This will grow by its own. Don't push. Let's go step by step. It's going very well. There are challenges. Yes, there are risks. Yes, we will have problems. We have problems already. But it works. Let's just try to make it work more. So let's leave aside the crystal ball and let's try, instead of seeing what is coming, try to build it from now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. This applause is here, and might the applause charge up your batteries. Thank you that you joined this panel today. This is your applause. What about Brexit?
What about Brexit?
How much will it harm the European Union?
So for industry, I mean, our viewpoint is, we're working right now across Europe anyway, whether it's a non-EU member or an EU member. So Britain will be the same for us after Brexit as well. It just depends on what rules are put down in terms of the EU-UK cooperation. But in terms of what we're looking at, we have thousands of people in the UK, we have thousands of people in Europe and in the US, so we're going to continue working that regardless of whether or not they're in the EU. But I would say that 10 years down the road, I think if I had to put on a little crystal ball, it would be that this momentum that has absolutely started in the last 2 years would continue. It's not going to be a systematic change. I don't think you'll see this huge major shift, but there will be changes, and that's because defense programs don't turn overnight. They take some years to turn, and I think that as long as we keep investing together and we actually get closer, we'll reduce duplication, we'll do that strategic threat analysis together, we'll do procurements together and smart defense, and I think that will show that we'll see better spending, more efficient spending, and therefore increased interoperability, and I think that's the big point.
But Brexit is more than just like a question. Yeah. It's also, it's a memento, you said. It's just something happening, and aren't you worried that kind of this possibility just might spread like a virus? That other countries might...
I mean, that's absolutely the political question. And so our job is to continue addressing the needs at the military level for the governments. And whether or not nations decide to do that based on their own economic situation is not for industry to decide. But I think it's important that industry does weigh in. And that's what they're doing in the Brexit debate. In the UK especially, you can see industry stepping up and saying, hey, this will hurt us if you do it a certain way. And I think that's important because they're the ones that have the jobs and know when they can move people or not people, or how they can move money, and what tax implications they'll have with Brexit. And so it's encouraging that I think that the UK companies like MBDA and Airbus and Rolls-Royce and others are speaking up and explaining how Brexit will impact them and hoping to influence the governments in terms of the negotiations.
Chris Lombardi, your applause. Thank you very much for your business insights. Judy Dempsey, now you have to get up and stand in the middle, please.
Yes, ma'am. So, Sinan's point, the crystal ball is highly difficult because politics has become so complicated and intertwined. But PESCO is not going to deliver European defence. What might deliver European defence will be Macron's idea of the European initiative. It might. It'll be a kind of coalition of the willing, free from the Commission, free from the EU member states. This is the first thing. Secondly, in 10 years' time, whether it's NATO or the EU, migration will not have gone away. The migration and refugee issue is just so fundamental. What happens with climate change in Sahel, in Niger? What happens with the development aid underpinning this? It's just monumental, the migration issue. I completely agree with you on this.
But what does it mean, Judy? We know all that.
No, we look at the short term. We're not thinking strategically. Even NATO doesn't act or think strategically. We have to look at the long-term strategic planning on how not to react, but how to preempt.
And how could this look like?
this is very interesting. The EU and NATO do not see eye to eye on resilience. NATO believes resilience has to start inside. The EU sees resilience as being externalized. And in some ways, they have this word stabilization. Let's stabilize before we talk about, you know, human rights or clean air. Let's get the fundamentals right, the infrastructure, development aid, sanitation, clean water. Then you can build up civil society, perhaps in parallel. It may sound rocket science, but we have the funds to do this. We have the money to do this. And this 10 years is very short. It's a very short thing. And one last thing I wanted to bring up was Brexit. Brexit is damaging the peace process in Northern Ireland. Brexit undermines the European dimension of peace, firstly. Secondly, Brexit, as for NATO and the EU, I mean, look at British defence spending. It's miserable. And it'll weaken EU defence capabilities, although Macron has invited Britain into this because of their strategic outlook. But if Britain continues down this road, it will damage a part of the NATO preparedness as well.
Judy Dempsey, it's not only energizing to read your columns, but also to listen to you. This is your applause. Thank you very much indeed. Commissioner, you get the last words. Yeah. Maybe you can talk a little bit about prosperity and how important really is the connection between peace.
But I think one of the most important things that I observe here is that we are on the very same line, responding to a question in 10 years' time whether there will be systematic changes. We need to observe and we need to understand how important changes has happened during the last few years. Not even 2, but could we discuss 7 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, internal EU cooperation or such close cooperation with NATO-EU as we are discussing now? And now it's not only discussion. This is real. This is happening. And this is happening because we see, and our governments saw, that this is a way to the peace and to the European prosperity. And this is a way also to keep peace globally with NATO. So I think that, of course, no crystal ball, but I think that we will go progressively the way that we are going now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is your applause. Thank you very much indeed. So it is no choice but a necessity. That's what I learned today. But I still have many open questions, I have to say. I think we found some answers. We should leave our bubbles, to put it that way. I'm very, very happy about your remarks and the remarks from your colleague. Maybe we also should leave our bubble of kind of being depressed. You know, and we shouldn't always focus on these depressing press conferences of some people here, but also kind of talk with each other and get engaged. Open our minds and maybe our hearts, but also be honest with each other, because the challenges are huge, and it's not enough to say we are important and therefore we are important. We kind of, that's what I also learned from all your remarks, we kind of have to prove our importancy. The reason why NATO exists and why NATO and the European Union keep working together. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. That was an interesting discussion. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to ask Kevin Barron on stage. He will be the moderator of the next very exciting panel. He's the